Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. Ukrainian and American delegations which met in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, agreed a 30-day ceasefire on Tuesday, although Russia has yet to respond. The meeting came on the heels of the biggest drone attack on Moscow so far. Is peace any closer? More on that in a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Europe contemplates the future of defense without Americans in Paris talks. The Polish Constitutional Tribunal is not impartial, says the EU Justice Court advocate. And Greenland chooses its future. Let's now go live to Ukraine correspondent Oskar Terzi in Kyiv, who has been following the progress of negotiations in Saudi Arabia. Good evening, Os. So what are the first reactions to the proposed 30-day ceasefire?
Well, this is something the Ukrainians have been floating for some time. It is clear now that Kyiv has pushed forward with these proposals for a 30-day ceasefire, although it must be said this is just the Ukrainians agreeing this with the Americans. The Russians have not agreed to any ceasefire yet. However, this will be seen by Washington as a big step, a big commitment from the Ukrainians. Now, in turn, the US has agreed to resume intelligence sharing with Ukraine, vital intelligence sharing, particularly for things like air defenses for the Ukrainians, and the resumption of military aid. This aid granted by Biden, which is being slowly sent in dribs and drabs to Ukraine, which President Trump had halted. It's believed that following these talks, the resumption of military aid will continue, as will the intelligence sharing. Now, Marco Rubio had this to say, the Secretary of State, following these negotiations. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about this agreement.
Today, we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation.
Now, those words came after 8 hours of talks between the US delegation headed by USA's top diplomat Marco Rubio and Ukraine's top diplomat Andrei Sybiha. Now, President Zelensky reacted to this news by publishing a statement on his Telegram. Let's take a listen to a clip of what he had to say about this news.
І сьогодні в розмові була пропозиція.
The American side understands our arguments and accepts our proposals. I want to thank President Trump for the constructive dialogue between our teams. During today's talks, the US proposed taking an immediate next step, establishing a full ceasefire for 30 days. This would not only include stopping missile, drone and bomb strikes, as well as actions in the Black Sea, but also a complete cessation of hostilities along the entire front line. Ukraine welcomes this proposal and sees it as a positive step. We are ready to move forward. The United States must now persuade Russia to do the same. If Russia agrees, the ceasefire will take effect immediately. Another crucial part of today's discussion was the US commitment to restoring military assistance to Ukraine, including intelligence support. Ukraine is ready for peace. Now, Russia must show whether it is prepared to end the war or continue it. The time for full truth has come.
Now, the mineral deal that Donald Trump wants Zelensky to sign was also on the agenda, although it has not yet been signed. Both sides have agreed to get that signed as soon as possible, moving forward to finalize that agreement in writing. Back to you in the studio.
That was Oskar Terzi reporting from Kyiv with some good news. Thank you very much, Oz, and of course, stay safe. Kyiv's ready for peace, says U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio after talks between the American and Ukrainian delegations in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The two teams gathered there to mend the strained relations between Kyiv and Washington and to push forward the rare earth minerals deal, regarded as a partial security guarantee for the war-torn country. In the end, they agreed a 30-day ceasefire plan. But is the peace in Ukraine really any closer? TVP World's chief political correspondent Aaron Damon reports.
As we go to air tonight, a step forward. Ukraine giving the green light to a US proposal for an immediate 30-day ceasefire, leaving the ball in Russia's court.
I hope they're going to say yes, and if they do, then I think we made great progress. If they say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here. But the president's been abundantly clear he wants the shooting to stop, he wants the warfare to stop, he wants the dying and the suffering to stop. And he believes, and rightfully so, that the only way to end this war is to negotiate an end to it.
America will also lift the pause on intelligence sharing and resume security assistance to Ukraine, with a rare minerals deal back on the table. It comes after US and Ukrainian delegations sat face to face for the first time since a meeting in the Oval Office descended into a shouting match between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now.
Leading the battle of diplomacy in Saudi Arabia, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Volodymyr Zelensky's Chief of Staff Andrei Yermak. Audio obtained from a briefing on board Rubio's flight to Jeddah revealed his thinking ahead of the talks.
The only solution to this war is diplomacy and getting them to a table where that's possible. We have to understand the Ukrainian position and just have a general idea of what concessions they'd be willing to make, because you're not going to get a ceasefire and an end of this war unless both sides make concessions. It's just obvious.
America has repeatedly squeezed Ukraine in recent weeks for concessions to help end the war. At the same time, it's widely believed that Russia has been getting an easier ride, with the US ruling out the prospect of NATO accession for Ukraine, a demand of Vladimir Putin. In President Trump's own words, he's been happier talking to Moscow than Kyiv.
I find that in terms of getting a final settlement, it may be easier dealing with Russia, which is surprising because they have all the cards. I mean, they're bombing the hell out of them right now. And I put a statement in, a very strong statement. Can't do that. You can't do that. Mr. President, we're trying to help them. And Ukraine has to get on the ball and get a job done.
That rhetoric was the backdrop for Ukraine's efforts in Saudi Arabia, as allies in Europe and Asia openly question the US commitments to their common defence.
All we're seeing is pressure on Ukraine to effect a ceasefire immediately, but the bottom line here is that it's on Russia's terms. It freezes the conflict along the line, which marks, an advance into 20% of Ukraine's territory. There are no guarantees for this not being repeated or getting even worse.
Just hours before the talks began, Moscow faced Ukraine's largest drone attack since the start of the war, a reminder of the very real conflict on the ground and the fight for sovereignty at stake. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
Military chiefs from 13 NATO and European countries have gathered in Paris to work on the shape of peace guarantees for Ukraine. Notably, no Americans have been invited. Tomorrow, 5 main military powers of Europe, that is France, Britain, Germany, Italy and Poland, along with EU and NATO representatives, will talk about rearming Europe. Sasha Farbach has this report.
NATO military chiefs of staff from 30 nations, as well as other allies, are gathering in Paris Tuesday. Amidst the backdrop of Donald Trump's reluctance to defend European allies, Paris as well as the European Union are standing firm, pushing to bolster the continent's defense industry quickly. Commission President von der Leyen laying out the plan ahead.
The European Council has agreed on our proposal for a new financial instrument. We call it SAFE, Security Action for Europe. We offer member states up to 150 billion euros in loans. These loans should finance purchases from European producers to help boost our own defense industry. The contracts should be multi-annual to give the industry the predictability they need. And finally, there should be a focus on joint procurement.
The French president has positioned Paris alongside Brussels as the epicenter of Europe's urgent push to bolster its defenses, with European leaders gathering for crisis talks in February, following worrying comments by America's vice president. Now, NATO defense chiefs of staff are convening to address Europe's challenges.
Discuss the ways to support Ukraine, including the modalities of an eventual peacekeeping mission in the case that there is a ceasefire or a peace in Ukraine.
As Europe shifts its focus, defense companies across the continent are experiencing a boom. German defense giant Rheinmetall has surged by an impressive 84% since the start of the year, while France's Thales, Italy's Leonardo, and the UK's BAE Systems are also reaping the rewards. The driving force? the EU's bold 5-year rearm policy, which could unlock up to 800 billion euros in investments. Experts predict this trend is just the beginning, with growth expected to continue for years to come.
Companies that we have broaden out, that they build new factories elsewhere, they build new factories at home. And this trend will likely now accelerate, as we now know there will certainly be more money for it.
Old habits die hard, and despite Europe's pivot, it's clear the continent still leans heavily on American-supplied arms. Between 2015 and 19 and 2020 and 24, arms imports by European NATO members surged by 105%, with the U.S. accounting for 64% of these supplies, a significant increase from previous years. But European leaders are determined to break free from this reliance, charting a bold new course and taking defense matters into their own hands.
Peace in our union can no longer be taken for granted. We have started to mobilize Europe's massive resources, and in the coming weeks and months, more courage will be necessary, and other difficult choices await us.
The new investments also herald a new opportunity for Europe's innovation and startups.
That we will have a significant wave of startups in the defense sector, or of existing startups or other small companies retooling towards the defense sector.
Paris will continue to be a vital place where Europe talks defense transformation. Wednesday, defense ministers from Europe's top 5 military powers, France, Britain, Germany, Italy, and Poland, will meet, underscoring the growing momentum behind Europe's shift toward greater autonomy in defense. The winds of change are clearly blowing, with Paris at the center of it all. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
And we're staying on the topic. Poland intends to buy European and place domestic orders for military amenities as part of the 800 billion euro Rearm Europe push. On Tuesday, Ursula von der Leyen announced the Security Action for Europe financing scheme, whose purpose is to boost the European defense industry. Poland's finance minister, Andrzej Domański, answered TVP World's questions at a press conference in Brussels, following high-level talks among EU leaders on how to finance Europe's ambitious defense plan. EU correspondent Angela Skujins reports.
Poland's finance minister Andrzej Domański said that it is crystal clear he wants to bolster Poland's own domestic defence industry and will use the zloty to help him do it. Now, the comments come off the back of top-tier economic and finance meetings in the Belgian capital today, where EU representatives huddled in Brussels to discuss the major issues impacting the continent today. This spans defence spending. Now, those ministers were tasked with ironing out the kinks of a bold new proposal from the European Commission, which received approval last week at a European Council meeting. The aim is to mobilise 800 billion euros of defence spending. The main instrument is a 150 billion euro investment package that member states can apply for a slice of. Now, TVP World asked the finance minister what he would like to use this money for, and while he said that he couldn't reveal the details of this as the proposal hasn't been hammered out yet, he expects to spend in Poland, and he will also use Poland's own GDP growth to do it. TVP World asked how this would be possible, as member states needed to dip into their own coffers to meet Europe's ambitious 650 billion euro investment target. Here is what he had to say regarding that question.
We are really doing an effort to modernize our army, and how we are doing that in terms of financing, thanks to the GDP growth. Last year we had the GDP growth of close to 3%. Now we are forecasting 4% GDP growth this year.
The EU's trade czar, Valdis Dombrovskis, said that he hopes the EU loosening its fiscal rules will help countries like Poland meet their defence spending needs. Now, Poland has been targeted with an excessive deficit procedure, and we'll find out in the next coming weeks whether this will be alleviated by this Rearm Europe push. But here is what that European Commissioner had to say.
That's exactly why the Commission is proposing this additional fiscal flexibility to alleviate those dilemmas for member states, in a sense, if they need to increase defense spending, whether they need to spend less somewhere else or raise additional revenues through taxes.
Now, the timeline for Rearm Europe to get off the ground is that it'll go to another European Council summit in the Belgian capital on the 20th and 21st of March. There, it needs a final tick of approval from those 27 EU heads of states before it can hit the ground running. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
The Advocate General of the European Court of Justice has called the actions of one of Poland's top courts an unprecedented revolt. In his opinion, the Polish Constitutional Tribunal is neither impartial nor independent. The body is accused of being closely tied to the right-wing opposition in Poland, which had taken steps to ensure the court's favourability during its term in office. Our correspondent in Strasbourg, Kazimierz Łysiak, has more.
Unprecedented rebellion. With these words, the Advocate General of the European Court of Justice pointed to the impartiality of one of Poland's top courts, the Constitutional Tribunal, on Tuesday. The tribunal is deemed closely connected to the conservative Law and Justice Party by both legal experts and the current Polish government. According to one analyst, the actions of the Constitutional Tribunal have indeed been unprecedented.
The Polish case was rather special. Back in 2021, the Polish Constitutional Tribunal has chosen the road of direct confrontation with EU law and with the Court of Justice of the European Union, with a series of highly problematic judgments where the Polish court would refuse to observe the earlier rulings of the Court of Justice of the European Union, and as I mentioned earlier, would at one occasion flat out reject the very fundamental concept of EU law, which is that the EU law has primacy over domestic law.
The ECJ's Advocate General, Dean Spielman, recommended to the judges of the ECJ who oversee the case to recognize the Polish court's actions as in direct violation of the European Union law. The judges can now agree or disagree with that recommendation, but they usually go along with these. So what does this mean for Poland? Most likely not that much, other than another argument for the current government to go through with its reforms.
Well, this is the opinion of the Attorney General of the Court of Justice of the European Union that we've been waiting for couple of years, actually. This is a very important opinion, and I suppose that the future verdict of the European Court of Justice will be in the same line, meaning that Polish Constitutional Court, led by Julia Przyłębska, was and still is not the independent and impartial court in the meaning of the European Union law.
The recommendation reflects years of protest of the current government against changes made by the Conservatives years ago. Changes which de facto removed an important part of checks and balances in Poland and brought both financial penalties and the freezing of billions of euro of funds from the European Union. So why can't the new government simply change everything back? Well, that's because all these changes require the signature of the president. And the current president, Andrzej Duda, hails from, you've guessed it, the Law and Justice Party, the conservative group responsible for all of this in the first place. So now the current ruling coalition is looking forward to the presidential election, which is bound to take place in May, in order to bring back the independence of the judicial branch in Poland. From Strasbourg, Kazimierz Łysiak, TVP World.
The Greenlanders have only just finished casting votes in the most important election in the island's history. 5 out of 6 parties taking part in the vote up for the independence of the semi-autonomous Danish territory, differing only on when to achieve it. But what would it mean for the strategically important land in the wake of President Donald Trump's comments on its future as part of the U.S.? Sonia Gatabiszczan reports from the Greenlandic capital of Nuuk.
Approximately 40,000 out of Greenland's total population of 56,000 people are heading to the polls on Tuesday to elect members of their parliament. This small group of voters commands the world's attention as questions surrounding Greenland's independence multiply.
I hope that we also will say to the rest of the world that we are Greenlandic and that we own our own country, and that the people, it is the East. They accept that we are Greenlanders and we are not for sale.
Greenland is a self-governing territory of Denmark, with almost 1/3 of its budget dependent on Denmark's subsidies and a shared colonial past. It is evident that there are some complex dynamics at play here, with Greenlanders' identity pitted against socioeconomic realities.
We have been thinking independence since the 70s, so it's not new to us. So of course it is important to us, and we will get it some way or another, but not right now.
I think that I have a good relationship with Danes, and I think that we keep going, even though we might have a past that's not so good.
Do you think Greenland should be independent someday?
Yeah, someday, but not right now.
Some see this relationship as a form of safety, not only with respect to finance, but also as a protection against foreign interest, such as Donald Trump's repeated claims that he wants to obtain Greenland for economic and security purposes. This is the view of the chairman of the Atasut party.
Well, right now I think it's our best protection for Donald Trump, to better to have some protection from the kingdom and from Europe.
Greenland's political parties are generally pro-independence, but they differ in ways on how and when to get it. Kuno Venker from the Nalaraq party is one of the politicians that generally welcome Donald Trump's interest in Greenland. And his party, Nalaraq, is one of those that are interested in cutting ties with Denmark sooner rather than later. But even he recognized that this could be a lengthier process.
If everything goes well, it's gonna take some years, because the activation doesn't mean we become independent. We will start negotiations. Negotiations can take some years.
Independence can be obtained through a referendum in Greenland, but it needs to be approved by the Danish parliament. And this process is not entirely straightforward, as some of the parties in the Danish parliament already indicated that they would vote against it. When it comes to self-financing of Greenland, some say that Greenland could rely on its rare earth minerals. However, this is at present not a very developed industry. And even if it were, Venker says that there is a catch.
So that's also why we need to get out of the self-rule government, because we need to share 50% of the earnings with Denmark at the moment.
First, income free for the Greenlandic government. 75,000 million Danish krones go to the Greenland, and the rest will be divided.
The rest is divided?
Yeah, if there are so much of it.
And how often does that happen?
We haven't seen that yet.
Despite a general wish for independence, none of the party members I spoke to these days indicated that Greenland already has a financial infrastructure to leave its current setup with Denmark. The strong Greenlandic identity, however, is visible on every corner. From Nuuk, for TVP World, Sonja Gatabishchan.
Ukraine is ready to stop shooting and is ready for peace, said American negotiators after the meeting with Kiev's envoys in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, came to an end. The outcome of the talks has already been praised by President Volodymyr Zelensky. But can a 30-day ceasefire come to pass and stop the bloodshed? Well, to talk about it, we're joined by Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project. Good evening, or good day to you, actually.
Good afternoon, where I am.
Yes, it's afternoon in Florida. So, Ukraine is ready to stop shooting, but the question on everyone's lips is, does it mean that peace is any closer?
Well, and that is the question, because Putin has not shown any interest in peace in Ukraine, and he welcomed President Trump on election day by sending 8 hours worth of drones, Iranian-made drones, into Kyiv. I sat in my apartment and watched them, and so President Trump is confident that Russia wants peace, but he's one of the few people in the world probably that would say that, and certainly one of the few people in Ukraine who would say that.
Right, so now the US is waiting for a sign of a goodwill from Russia. If there's no sign of goodwill, what will happen next?
Well, I think Vladimir Zelensky has three choices. He can continue to try to get what he wants from the United States: weapons, security guarantees. He can go to Europe and try to get the weapons and security guarantees he needs from them, or he can continue to fight with whatever he can get from whoever he can get it. And 2 and 3 are sort of almost the same thing. The problem with Europe right now is that, France has been talking a tough game on Putin for a couple of years now, but everyone knows that Poland is the military leader of Europe. And, and so what Macron says is vastly different than what he does. Both France and Belgium, mentioned in your earlier story, have sent more money to Russia in the form of LNG payments than they have in aid to Ukraine. Belgium has controlled nearly $250 billion in frozen Russian assets for 3 years, and they've done virtually nothing with it. And in fact, their contribution to Russia is enough to buy about 4,800 of those Iranian drones that threaten Kyiv every night. So there's not a lot of good options for President Zelensky. And so, I hope, it is my fervent hope, and I think all Ukrainians and all Americans hope, that there can be something concrete established in Jeddah today.
Now, Marco Rubio, before his meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart in Jeddah, said that Ukraine will probably not get all the territories occupied by Russia back. But does it mean that the U.S. wants Russia to step back as well and give Ukraine back some of the gains? And, will Russians be ready to even explore such an avenue? Because so far they said no, one step back.
Yeah, well, for President Trump wrote The Art of the Deal, which is a best-selling book on how to negotiate, and giving away something without getting anything for it, giving away Ukrainian territories without any corresponding things from Russia is beyond my skill level as a negotiator. So I would have liked to have seen something concrete from Russia in exchange for that statement. But at the end of the day, I think that there's 3.5 million people living in occupied Ukraine. And those people live under the worst conditions possible. And as one example, we do a lot of work with Christians that have been tortured and imprisoned by the Russians in occupied Ukraine. There's 3 million Christians living there. And we have a movie, A Faith Under Siege, that tells their stories. And that's compelling to Trump's voters. So when we air it in churches in America, they get fired up because nobody knows the horrors that are happening to the 3 million Christians and 3.5 million Ukrainians that are living in occupied Ukraine.
That's an interesting angle. Now, a rare earth minerals deal has not been signed today. Why do you think this has not happened? And can it become once again a bone of contention between Kyiv and Washington?
Well, it goes down to what Trump wants and what President Zelensky wants, and that's and Zelensky wants security guarantees. President Trump wants a quick deal, and he is not super concerned about how he gets it. He just wants the war to stop. And so, and here's the value of that minerals agreement. That the idea is that if Ukraine signs this minerals agreement with America, that gives America a vested interest in what's happening in Ukraine, something that many Americans do not see right now. It's a good thing to help help Ukraine free themselves from Russia. But many people do not see it in the American interests. And those people voted for Trump. And so it is actually appropriate that they're in Jeddah right now, because Jeddah, is home to Saudi Aramco, which many say this deal is structured around. Back many years ago, American oil companies joined forces with Saudi oil companies to create Saudi Aramco, a joint venture. Which there's a reason why there is a military base, U.S. military base, in Saudi Arabia. It's because they have this interest in American interests have an interest in Saudi oil. So there is a precedent for this, and this could work. It all comes down to Vladimir Putin not breaking. He's already broken 25 peace agreements, more or less. It comes down to Vladimir Putin not breaking the 26th.
Mm-hmm. So, well, but we know that Donald Trump has already said there will be no American troops in Ukraine, whether it comes to defending the rare earth minerals mines or any other entity in Ukraine. So, talking about peace guarantees, Ukraine, as we know, is already talking about it without the participation of the American partners. Do you think that Europe will be at some point finally incorporated in these peace talks? Because it seems that they are progressing quite fast and Europe is still not at the negotiating table.
Well, it would be good to make Europe feel like they have a stake in this, because they do have a stake in this. And, there's a direct correlation between amount that a country spends on defense. Inverse correlation between distance from Moscow and how much the country spends on defense. So, Italy spends virtually nothing on defense. And as you know, Poland's getting up past 5%. So Europe has a stake in this. It would be nice if they acted like they had a stake in this. I don't think there's a lot of respect from Trump for the Europeans, simply because, again, they're funding both sides of the war. They're sending more money to Russia than they are to Ukraine. So, and they're not fulfilling their NATO obligations. Certainly, this is not true of Eastern Europe, but certainly of Southern Europe and Western Europe. So, I think for Europe to actually be treated as an adult in the room, they need to behave like an adult in the room.
Stephen Moore, founder of the Ukraine Freedom Project, was our guest tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Always great to be with you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more here on TVP World.